30 seconds. 20 seconds. 10 seconds.
Hi,
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning again. This is Jonathan Small, host and producer of Face to Face. And Face to Face is one of two different programs that I have the pleasure of hosting and producing every single week live at accesstv.org studios. Face to Face is a show that's designed to ask the guests the hard questions and give you, the viewers, the answers and information that you deserve to know. This morning, we have no stranger to the accesstv.org network, who I've had the pleasure of having in studio on both All About You and Face to Face. And also, he has been a guest on Morning Talk Live with J. Stan McCauley Talk Show. This guest has a tremendous amount of political experience. He is the former counselor for the President Bill Clinton under the Bill Clinton administration. He's also a former state senator in Connecticut, former state comptroller in the state of Connecticut, and a two-time Democratic nominee for governor in the state of Connecticut. The guest this morning on Face to Face is no other than Democratic political strategist, analyst, Bill Curry. Good morning, Bill. How are you doing?
I'm fine, and it's great to be with you again, Jonathan. Thank you.
Okay. Usually ask the guests every single week to let people know a little bit about yourself and background, and I hope I gave people some information about yourself, but if you have anything else you would like to add, feel free to do so.
All around good guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair
Yeah,
enough.
you did fine. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Bill, last week, the verdict came in for former President Donald Trump being found guilty, I believe, on all 34 counts. It's been classified as hush money and some other legal terminologies. First of all, why do you think former President Donald Trump was found guilty?
Well, Donald Trump's entire life has just been one sustained criminal enterprise. And like so many of the very rich and very powerful, he's been able to escape accountability. He's even better at it than almost any of the other rich and powerful people that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really a stain on the record of our judicial system. This is a guy who's clearly evading taxes, a multi-billionaire who went decades without paying taxes of any kind. And they've been auditing him for over 20 years because the IRS, it turns out, we learned from that, doesn't employ enough people to complete the audits of the rich and powerful. Think about it. And he had all kinds of other violations when he was practicing racial discrimination in his housing back 50 years ago now, when he was starting out in his career with his father. He was able to escape with a consent agreement rather than admit wrongdoing. He's stiffed contractors and laborers. He's corrupted the system in so many ways before finally dipping into, toward the end of his life, out and out explicit racial politics, and now truly fascism. To see the justice system begin to catch up with him on the civil side by finding him guilty of sexual assault and of defamation and of and of tax fraud and insurance fraud and banking fraud. When you look at the accumulating convictions for Trump now on the criminal side, 34 felonies, according to a jury of his peers last week in New York City, in addition to all those civil cases, you would think that in the minds of most people in America, he would be disqualified from holding any public office at all. That hasn't quite happened yet. I'm not optimistic, but I'm hopeful. And so this is really just the law finally catching up with a very bad guy. I'll just add one more thing about it. This was the weakest case against him. It was the only case in which you could make an alternative argument to criminal intent. All the others that have been so awfully delayed, where justice truly has been denied because it's been delayed, but the treason case, in Washington, the election interference case, the theft, classified document theft case, all those in Washington and Georgia and in Florida, those cases are even stronger. The penalties are even bigger. Should he face the court in each of those, it is so likely he'll lose all of them. And the question is whether our political system can see how obvious this is and react and make sure that he doesn't get power.
Well, Bill, from what I understand, Trump is going to be sentenced July 11th. I think that's 4 days before the Republican convention. Now, when people say or hear sentence, it's very unlikely that he's going to be sentenced to any jail time or any prison time. I think I'm hearing speculations about probations or something on that level, or fines, and then he obviously is going to appeal the case. So he's already technically been found guilty, but the appeal process, in the fact of him being sentenced and being tried and charged as a convicted felon, there's no legal political rules that can still keep him from being elected president of the United States. I mean, his case is still a lot different than, let's say, the Watergate with Richard Nixon's, if you wanted to make some comparisons of the two, if that's possible.
This guy makes Richard Nixon look like Mother Teresa. What he's done so far exceeds Watergate. I want to take issue. It's a very important point you raised, Jonathan, about the question of whether there's jail time here. And there's debate about whether there should be. There's, of course, speculation as to whether there will be. I'll just state in my own case, I don't write it off at all. Watching this judge, on the one hand, this is a first-time offender, and these are nonviolent offenses. On the other hand, his deportment, when you're doing a sentencing report, you look at a set of other considerations. So first-time offender and nonviolent, those cut his way. Every other consideration cuts against him. The multiple contempt of court incidents, the complete lack of remorse, the defaming the judiciary itself, and the denial of responsibility, the obvious, the degree to which it is obvious that this is part of a pattern of his life. I myself believe, trying to get as much, objectivity about it as I can muster, that this is a case in which anybody else would get jail time. And I think this judge, in light of all that I just said, I think it's slightly more likely than not that he will give him some jail time. I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised if he got, at a minimum, 6 months in jail with 6 more months of probation. Something like that. And this is for, again, 34 felonies, each of which carries a 4-year penalty. So it'd be a pretty damn light sentence at that. But to go all this way, to put the country and the judicial system, and Trump himself for that matter, through all of this, and then to say, well, there's not really a prison penalty applicable here. One, people would know how many other people for the same offense. Michael Cohen went to jail for a couple of years For a lesser offense, Alan Weisselbaum, his chief financial officer, is in jail right now.
Mm-hmm.
To let the big guy off entirely, who caused all their crimes, directed all their crimes, to let him off entirely, I think would send a terrible message once again about the idea that if you're rich enough and powerful enough, you just escape accountability. And I think it would raise legitimate questions in the minds of a lot of people. If this really wasn't a violation worth jail time, why did you do this? Why did we just go through all this? The Trump people just saying that it's all just paperwork. It really doesn't matter that you can commit fraud on paper. How every great fraudster commits fraud, by the way. It's just a paper crime. I think it would be a great mistake. And so I don't know what he'll do, obviously, and I don't feel certain even of any prediction, but I think on July 11th, with 4 days to go, I think he'll be sentenced to it's a little more likely than not that this judge will sentence him to some jail time. You're absolutely right that he won't then go to jail, have an appeal, etc. But it won't be an appeal with very good prospects. And even this deranged and deluded Republican Party, I think they're going to start to absorb that they got a guy who can't pardon himself because it's a state crime, that they're about to nominate for president, who, when his appeals run out, is going to be facing jail time.
Well, excuse me, Bill. That's the next question. I mean, the political implications and ramifications of the upcoming November election. There's a lot at stake when you have your candidate that has the possibility of sentence towards jail time or prison time, and just the whole image that it's going to hang over the country. Now, some people say the Republicans will tell you it's all the Democrats putting up this whole court trial and this whole court case, and there's no justification of him even being in this position, that the jury was questionable, the judge was questionable. I hear that side. Some people say it went from a misdemeanor charge to a felony charge. So clearly there's already been politics being played on both sides, but particularly the Republicans.
No.
It's not. Okay.
There's no evidence. I mean, seriously, it has to at least be, because when Trump says that and the media sometimes parrots it, you're saying that the judge, Marchand, you're saying that the judge is a criminal, because that would be a criminal act. You're saying that the jury was rigged, that they're all criminals, that the prosecutor's a criminal. This is what Trump always does. I know people are saying that you're right. No question you're right about that. That's the argument on both sides. Everything's being politicized. Biden's son is on trial for a lesser offense, actually, than Trump was just convicted of this morning. The Justice Department is prosecuting Biden's son for what is on the books a lesser offense right now. Another ally of Trump just got off from the same Justice Department a few months back. There is zero evidence. And I can tell you, when I worked in the White House for Bill Clinton, there wasn't a member of our staff who would dare call the Justice Department, because we still lived in the 250-year tradition that was just something you didn't do, that there was a red line, and that the people who were elected to office, or who served people elected to office, had no right to meddle in what the Justice Department did. Trump promises to do that. Trump did it. Trump had his own name removed from the Michael Cohen case. And then when Michael Cohen was eligible for parole, he told the Justice Department to tell him he couldn't get out unless he promised not to write about the politics of it, which is illegal. We have lots of evidence acknowledged of Trump politicizing the Justice Department. We don't have one bit. The fact that the Justice Department waited 2 years to bring a case on treason shows me that at least Biden, you have to say there is zero evidence that he's crossed that line. And when I say we didn't cross it, when I was in the Clinton White House, even when Clinton himself was under Clinton, they set up a special prosecutor. They just about knocked Clinton out of office. His own Justice Department did that. Mm-hmm. That's because we observed that line. Not just Clinton, every president, Democratic, Republican, except Nixon, every president since George Washington did. Trump is the only one who has not in a sustained way, along with Nixon in that one instance, also did some interfering, tried to unsuccessfully. Trump actually did it and succeeded. And there's no evidence that Biden has done anything else than what every other president did. And for that, he's to be commended. So Trump always, that's what Trump does, project, distract, tell people that it's the other side that's doing what he's doing. Zero evidence, zero.
Okay, well, Bill. Now let's go
So we
into.
can just be careful. I feel like I know I'm talking like I'm angry at you for saying
Yeah.
out there. We just have to keep reminding ourselves not to let Trump's toxins leach into our own bloodstream, so that we take these things for granted. The day that it's shown that he has, I'll be as angry at Biden as I am at Trump. Not quite, but I'll be angry.
Okay. Well, Bill, is it important now with the sentence being set for July the 11th to determine what sentence will the judge actually give former President Donald Trump? Let's say he gives former President Trump probation, no jail time, no prison time, some type of big steep fine. Now we move into the Republican convention, and we set the terminologies of the voting base who are going to be supportive of former President Donald Trump would vote for him regardless. The Democratic base of people who are going to vote for Biden would be voting for Biden regardless. So does that leave, let's say, the undecided voting bloc that could be geared towards either particular candidate to look very closely towards how the criminal charges are going to be looked at going past the appeal deadline, going into the next, because also there's going to be some debates, I think 3 debates that's going to be coming up within the next 6 months before the election. So there's going to be a lot of political ramifications that both parties are going to have to now monitor. So would that now kind of let me ask you a question about the undecided voting bloc. How would they look at this particular 2 candidates if they're going to make a decision come November who to vote for?
Okay, so the first and most honest answer is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great mystery right now. My party, the joke in my family is that my first word was vote. And I was born into a family that believed if you didn't vote Democratic, you couldn't be buried in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
An old urban, northeastern, midwestern view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think, by the way, that since then, Catholic Church may have switched parties, but I myself am still a Democrat. It is shocking that we are facing the situation that we face right now. Trump is the whole trifecta. He is demonstrably mentally ill. He is now an adjudicated felon, and he is, and I say this having not just consulted, but really examined a broad swath of the scholarly literature. He is a fascist. Fascism isn't about a particular ideology as we think of it. It's not a set of policies. You can have any education policy or healthcare policy or foreign policy or tax policy or transportation and still be a fascist. It doesn't matter. Fascism is about the earmarks, according to people who study it, willingness to incite people to violence, a constant propaganda machine, a devotion to constant lying, peddling conspiracy theories, always trying to disadvantage the most groups of people, scapegoat groups of people who are already the most vulnerable within your society, out and out corruption, subversion of the judiciary, from Mussolini to Hitler to Franco to Orban in Hungary now, and Bolsonaro in Brazil. Fascists, since fascism was invented 100 years ago, they all do all of those things. And the principal ally of fascism, the principal strategist of fascism today is Vladimir Putin. His principal ally and pinup boy is Donald Trump. And so, and as Trump says, he's willing to subvert the Constitution. He says that out loud. He's willing to suspend judicial rights for his political opponents. He says that out loud. It's the opposite of the aspirations on which this country was established. And if he wins, there's a really good chance that is the end of the American democratic experiment. And having said all that, the really bad news is that we're tied. And if you had said to me 20 years ago that there could be a narcissistic, sociopathic, adjudicated criminal and fascist running against the Democratic Party, I would have predicted a Democratic landslide.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, we're probably a point or two behind. And this says something about the condition of our people. What is it that softens the ground for fascism? And by the way, the white nationalism that is a huge component part of it. And how do we get here? What condition are they in? And it says a lot in a related way about the Democratic Party, which in its glory days stood as a tribune for the disadvantaged and the powerless, the excluded, but which I believe is not as responsible as Republicans, but is very responsible for where we are, and because we didn't speak to the fundamental questions of the distribution of power, income, wealth, and opportunity. We allowed ourselves to become the only developed nation in the world without a universal health care policy. We allowed the floor under wages to collapse. And in 20 odd states, the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Think of it. And I won't. I can just give a list of these things. And so I'm very proud of our people when they stand up for reproductive freedom, or they stand up against the gun lobby, or they stand up against the fossil fuel industry, which is never going to give us a nickel anyway. But these don't actually take those kinds of stands, as much as I admire and support them. They don't take courage. What would take courage would be for the Democratic Party to stand up to its own big donors and say loudly and clearly that we are about to return to our finest traditions, and then prove it by doing some things that actually solve the problems of cities, that actually extend health care, that put back a floor under wages, that bring down the costs of energy and pharmaceuticals and food. We've let people down. Pollsters say between 9 and 12 million people voted twice for Obama and then for Trump. By definition, those people aren't racist. They voted twice for Obama. And it at least indicates you need some other word. They're people that we let down. And it increasingly cuts across racial and ethnic lines. The people we've let down have left us because we won't show them what to do. They're going with the person who tells them who to blame. And so we need to change that. We can win this election possibly even if we don't change, because Trump is so bad, it's going to be a toss-up. But we should never be in the position we're in. It breaks my heart to see it.
Well, that was going to actually be my second question. I mean, the fact that even on both party sides that you don't have, other good alternative candidates from the Democratic side to the Republican side. I mean, I can't recall the last time in a major election where you really didn't have another particular candidate to oppose the president in the Democratic Party, at least have another strong candidate in the Republican side. It just seemed like it's, President Biden and former President Trump, and that's it. I mean, and also keep in mind, Bill, that former President Trump hasn't even selected a vice president candidate at this particular time. How close are we looking towards him selecting a candidate to run on his ticket for November?
I don't know. Who knows where he is? He's an impulsive person. He's got the attention span of a fruit fly, and his word, as almost everyone who's ever worked closely with him says, is of absolutely no good whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So even if he tells someone that there is a choice, that you could probably rule that person out the moment he says it. I think it'll be late in the game. I don't know how he'll approach it. I'm sure. I doubt he does. The one thing I know is that in all of his choices, he will correct what he regards as the biggest mistake of his first administration, which was to have people in his employ who had any values other than abject devotion to him. so that when it comes the time for a Mike Pence or even a Barr or Rosenstein, for when it comes time, and the many generals and military people who stood up to him during his first term, to our eternal betterment, he's determined not to put anyone like that in any position, starting with vice president. These will be fellow fascists, and they will be people who gladly bend the knee. That's the one thing that we can be sure of. And so, I think the one of the many things we should be doing differently is explaining to people. I know everybody's always just looking for the perfect slogan, but when you're the Reform Party, which we still technically are, it means you're the party of new ideas, and new ideas require explanation, and this situation requires explanation. We should explain to people who he is and what it means to elect him much better than we have. And then we should explain to people what we're going to do differently from what we've been doing to make their lives better than they are.
Well, one last thing. Do you think the July the 11th sentence is going to carry a lot of political influence moving forward? I mean, if he gets off, with just probation or parole, again, the odds of him being sentenced, you claimed earlier that there's a strong chance that he could get sentenced to do some jail or prison time, although
a little more than 50-50 is what I say. I wouldn't bet if you thought otherwise and tried to snooker me into betting on it, I wouldn't. But yeah, I think it might. I'm just saying I think it might. I don't write it off. I think it's slightly more likely than not.
Okay, but even technically, he will appeal, and he wouldn't physically do any jail time as long as the appeal process.
Before the election.
Yes, before the election.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the Supreme Court is completely corrupted and made partisan and ideological. I wait with fear what their ruling is going to be on his immunity. Mm-hmm. It had never occurred. No one ever said in public that I could find, from the founding of the country until Trump became president, until Trump was defeated for re-election, no one ever suggested that a president was immune to criminal prosecution. I mean, no one ever even said it. And now the Supreme Court is treating it as if it's an actual possibility that, in fact, one guy really is above the law. If they honor the Constitution in any way in the ruling that's due next week, here's something to think about, and that is that the Jack Smith trial for treason in Washington, I know people say this isn't the case, but I think that it could go forward. And I think the fact of his conviction by a jury of his peers, people have said that all this Trump trial stuff has helped Trump and not us. And so far it's been true in some ways. But being an indictment is not the same as a conviction, and a primary is not the same as a general election. Mm-hmm. And a jury of your peers is not the same as a political appointed opponent or a prosecutor. Being indicted by a jury of your peers in a general election, I think, will make a difference. Many people whom I like have written in the last few months, but it'll only be on the margins and just be a little bit. Well, we used to be a country with a lot of landslides in presidential elections: Roosevelt, Johnson, Nixon, Reagan. In 1984, that stopped being the case. This is the longest we've ever gone without a landslide, and most of our presidential elections are photo finishes. So when you affect something at the margins, it could be the margin of victory. Mm-hmm. If it makes a 1 or 2 point difference, that could save us. And so I still think that as this sinks in, I think it will help Biden somewhat. He was doing terribly before that, so it doesn't lock it up for him. But I think it makes him. I think the effect will help us. It will help us at the margins, but that may be enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, there's going to be a wait and see process, and I thought you broke it down. I mean, you had broke it down very excellent towards your assessment on how you see. Obviously, you didn't hold any punches on your feelings towards Trump. And I wouldn't expect anything otherwise, knowing you the way I know you. But you are, as a former state Connecticut senator, a former Connecticut state comptroller, you ran for governor, as I mentioned, twice as a Democratic nominee. So you have a very strong political knowledge base in the state of Connecticut also to go along with your national views. And there was a documentary that I sent to you and a few other people from 1989 talking about the Other Connecticut, basically breaking down Connecticut. At that time, I think it was the wealthiest state. I think it might have slipped to second or third, but it's still one of the wealthiest states in the country. But yet, three cities, the capital city of Hartford, the largest city in Bridgeport, and New Haven, where you have the prestigious Yale University, was listed in the documentary as the other unforgotten cities that really has a lot of. At that time in 1989, you had a lot of public housing projects that has federally kind of been demolished. But even since that period of time, if you still go into your core inner cities in Connecticut, and those three were the ones outlined in the documentary, there is a tremendous difference between those cities and the residential affluent suburbs in some cases that surround those cities. When you were running for governor, both times I believe, the one thing you mentioned when former Governor John Rowland was promoting bringing back the cities with Adrian Landing and other development projects in other cities. I don't know what he was talking about beyond Adrian Landing's on a large scale, but let's just say your theme was, it's one thing to make the cities visible, it's another thing to make the cities livable. First of all, what do you mean when you say the difference between livable and visible?
Well, Roland is my opponent, and it's hard for me to be fair to him. Of course, it's very humbling to remember that I ran twice against a multiple felon, although it wasn't proven until afterward. And both times the voters went with him, although in each case they were difficult circumstances and multi-party, multi-candidate races. But Roland did, and it's also true that Roland wasn't the only one. There were lots of people who took this approach. Let's build a lot of nice downtown attractions. People will visit the city. And I think, well, if you don't make it a city people will live in, they're probably not going to visit either. At least not in enough numbers to make a big difference. And that's not how you fix the city. And when you sent me that, when you told me you were sending me that documentary, I thought, oh God, I got to do an hour in the show, and then he wants me to watch this documentary on top of it. That's going to cut into my schedule. But I was very happy. One, a lot of it showed the neighborhoods I grew up in, and it was like being in a little bit of a time trip. And then, of course, it was very sobering to think how little has actually changed in all that time. And so I thank you for that. And I just say, when you hear people talk about poverty, or you hear people talk about cities, they always describe them in this, in language that suggests that they're so deep rooted and the problems are so complicated, and it's such a historic and long lasting curse. They say they want to do something about it, but they talk about it in language which it despairs, which suggests that really it's not something you can fix. And I think one of the most important things, and I was thinking watching that documentary, is these problems, the fact that they still persist, is the result of choices that we've made, bad choices that we've made, and that we could unmake and replace with better choices. If people say we have to fix our cities, but then they don't, and I really do believe that if you can't make your cities work, you can't make your state or your country work either. That's how you start. That's how you start. You clear the board. That's the first problem you go to. And there are things when I was running then, and it's still true now, property taxes stifle poor cities and small towns alike. And they derange development. All these little towns out in eastern Connecticut, where I am now, they have something called fiscal zoning. Anybody who wants to put up a strip mall, even though there's no economic argument for it or public demand for it, they want the property taxes so badly. They can't fund their schools. This is not just for band uniforms. This is for math teachers, and inner cities and small towns have a common bipartisan multiracial interest in this outcome, and almost everything that really works gets everybody on the same bus because it works for everyone. And so the first thing I ran on was property tax relief. We had two big cases. Horton v. Meskel and Sheff versus O'Neill, in which the state, the last one was 30 years ago, the one before it was 50 years ago, in which through our state Supreme Court, we promised to equalize educational opportunity for every child. And in all those decades since, it just got worse. It didn't get any better at all. They didn't fix it. It got worse. And so all the other states in New England, the state pays well over half the cost of education. In Connecticut, it's closer to a third. And that difference, that's the biggest item right there. And so that drives the crazy development that you can't sustain. That has people building strip malls that are nowhere near mass transit routes. And it leaves cities starving for resources. And so you start there. You have, we all talk about food deserts in cities. There's also a credit desert. Small businesses, the self-employed, they can't get loans to start a business. They can't get working capital to sustain one. It's still almost as if someone built a moat around that area, and you have to be able to get invested. You can't starve a city like that. The cost of insurance is, double cars and houses in cities as opposed to suburbs. They say it's because of the higher cost, because of higher crime. But then when the crime rates go up, the insurance rates go up. But when the crime rates go down, the insurance rates still go up. And so we need to fix fundamental issues like that. We need to have community schools. And that, for people familiar with that movement, we need to change the way we do that. We could do all of these things. We need a state plan of conservation development. People have been fighting unsuccessfully to be able to have local approval mechanisms for housing, for instance, and to encourage more housing. There's a deficit of housing, which is driving up prices for everybody from the very poor to the very rich. And we need to be building vastly more housing than we are. And we need to be getting over some of that local resistance. You don't have to have people overriding every town's ability. I would just say that on cities and mass transit routes through every community, on that mass transit route, there should be an ability to get housing built through state policy and without local obstruction. And that's how we're going to fight climate change. That's how we're going to fight the decline of cities. That's how we're going to save our open spaces. We got to do that. So there are a set of, it's none of these things is intellectually challenging. It's not hard to figure out why you need it. It's just politically challenging. It's hard to figure out how do you do it. It's why I ran for governor twice, because a governor can get what he or she wants if they're willing to really fight. And, if they're willing to fall on their sword for something they believe in. Lowell Weicker got us an income tax. And, if a governor has enough of a vision and enough commitment to pay whatever political price, they can get those things done. I don't think any of that will get done until we do have a governor who sees it. But when the saddest thing about that documentary is knowing how much of it's true right now.
Well,
and it doesn't have to be.
Well, excuse me, Bill. I mean, one thing, and I don't know if you can look at it as a major difference. When that documentary came out in 1989, it was targeting least Stowe Village housing projects. That project no longer exists the way that it looked then, but that was a national federally funded program of demolishing public housing projects because they pretty much ran their course. I don't want to say that is a good strategy or the best strategy towards eliminating at least your housing poverty, but certainly that's on a federal level. Another area that was, I guess, non-existent at that time was during the Rowland administration and also the Clinton administration. The welfare reform policies were enacted. I don't know if you looked at those policies as something.
I was there.
You was there. Okay, so how do you see those two areas? First of all, demolishing public housing projects and implementing welfare reform policies towards reducing or having an impact on reducing poverty.
The way we demolished housing for the poor in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
What you described, I was born in Bowles Park, which is also gone now. And I drive through often, and what's there looks better than what we had.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad they did it. I'm glad about Stowe Village. We have a supply problem. We need vastly more units than we have. So just tearing one down even when you actually replace it with something better, well, that just leaves you with the same number of better housing, but the same number. And we have to find a way to make housing more affordable, and we can. But again, we haven't taken these steps that are simple to figure out but hard to implement politically. I wish Biden would do something like that, and if we opened up the papers tomorrow morning or went online tomorrow morning and saw that there was a multi-billion-dollar commitment to go out now and begin to build housing units to address the fact that people can no longer afford to buy homes or the middle class, his numbers go up the next morning. And this is, Biden has the right. People don't realize that all these pharmaceuticals, these drugs we pay for that cost us so much, that impoverish old people, especially, and any who are listening already know it. A lot of those drugs, an amazing number, were paid for. The research and development was paid for by taxpayers. Your government actually developed those drugs. And in the law at the time was a provision still in the books that said, if the companies price gouge the drugs that we paid to develop as taxpayers, the president can identify it and just by executive order bring those drugs down. He brought down the cost of insulin for Medicare patients, and he's going to bring down prices on 12 more drugs 2 years from now, decades back. He could get up tomorrow and issue an order that brought down the price of hundreds of drugs for every American, many hundreds. And if he did that, his numbers would go up that day. He'd solve, you want to bring people together, solve a problem that's really killing them. Just go out and do that. But you have to tell your donors in the drug industry that the jig is up and that you're going to have a divorce. And so the problem for us has been that we don't do things like that. Everything that still needs to be fixed in Hartford could be fixed by the right political choice, and could be fixed by if we had a commitment to genuine reform. And it's not all. I was always I always tell people I'm a liberal, but I'm a cheap liberal. I really believe in doing things for the least possible amount of money and saving. I did a lot of things to back that up. If we were really fighting corruption, we could save money. If we were really doing healthcare reform, we could save money. If we took our spending practices seriously, as I did when I was controller of the state, we could show people that we're not just picking their pockets, we're solving their problems. And we could build a constituency that's already mostly there behind these things and get them done. We have the power.
Right. Well, for one thing, I think people, who are looking at this program, who are looking at you or meeting you for the first time, if they don't understand, I'll do a little history check for people. You were predicting some of the charges that former Governor John Rowland was charged with, at least very similar.
Of the charges.
Of the
it
charges.
Was all my research. Yeah. No,
right.
When I was running, we just couldn't get the newspapers. Were just they were in the tank with Rowland, especially the Hartford Current, because they were buying the downtown development stuff, and because it was easier for them. But everything he went to jail for came out of research I did when I was running, and we had a tiny underfunded campaign. But I saw Ella Grasso, former governor, first woman governor of the country elected, had passed some reforms, including procurement reforms, how the state buys all the stuff and contracts and building all that. And she said that in order for you to not have competitive bidding, there had to be a real emergency. Not just somebody says it's an emergency, but there had to be act of God. The water had to be coming over the levee, and if it was, then you didn't have to put the sandbags out to bid. You could just go get them. And when Rowland came in, he changed that law so that, in fact, any one of his minions could just declare an emergency without proving anything and give a contract to whomever they wanted. And so when I saw the change in the law, I said, the guy I worked with, I said, just find out anywhere this law has been implemented. And I can promise you there'll be corruption. And we found, it took a little digging, but in 3 weeks under the gun, we found 3 projects over $100 million that had gone to its 2 top donors. And we showed that there was over $20 million in excess fees over and above the $15 million they were entitled to as developers. Just two families with $20 million in their pocket for buildings they had no right to be building in the first place, over and above the $15 million that someone would have gotten. And in the papers, a few papers picked up on it, and a lot of others ignored it, and he won. But the U.S. attorney looked at it and brought in his deputy chief of staff and said, we have information, i.e. my press conference, that there's been corruption in the governor's office. Is this true? And Lawrence Alabose, the guy, said, well, yes. They said, were you part of it? He goes, well, yes, I have been. And he had demanded his bribes in gold bars because he'd read it was a good hedge against inflation. And they went out and dug them up from under an apple tree in his backyard that night, and that was the end of Roland.
Right.
And corruption, convincing studies show, a guy named Malcolm Sparrow at Harvard, 12% of our Medicaid budget, think of how big a part that is of Connecticut's budget, 12% goes to corruption right now. If you want to get serious about corruption, there's a 12% cut in our health care bill that we could implement tomorrow if we followed up on it. It goes across the board easily into public works and transportation. If you take corruption seriously, as neither party does, that in and of itself could bring us to back to fiscal sanity, and also renew the public's faith. And you take corruption on, you achieve those savings, and you devote yourself to that principle, and people will be more willing to commission you to do something new because they'll have more trust. But we haven't done that.
Well, Bill, we're out of time. I don't know if we're going to end it on that segment on a good note. I would say an honest note is the best way to say what you just stated is the honest truth. So it's how we just ended.
If I can say 20 seconds, and that is, it's important to me that we, on my side, Democrats, learn to critique our leaders publicly so that we can get change. We don't have to mow them all down in public like the Republicans do, but we need to have a constructive debate. And if we do that, we can make these change. But above all, the difference is so great that even if you're as dissatisfied as I am, get out there and vote. Save this democracy in November, please.
Excellent last words to end this particular segment. Don't have to ask you what would be your last statement because you just stated it. And I definitely felt, Bill, you brought a lot of strong political expertise to both segments on the national side with former President Donald Trump and even on the statewide side in Connecticut towards what has happened over the past 35 years. And it was a pleasure having you as a guest this morning on, I guess, revamp version of Face to Face. And I wish you the very best of luck in the near future.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was a pleasure as always.
Okay. You're welcome. Take care of yourself, Bill. Okay, this is Jonathan Small. Just enjoyed hosting and producing this edition of Face to Face with former two-time Democratic nominee for governor of the state of Connecticut, Bill Curry. And it was a pleasure having Bill on this particular morning. And hopefully you, the viewers, were able to get something out of this particular segment. Currently, right now, I am working on booking a guest and a topic for next week. With a guest already booked for the 18th for a face-to-face show, it's very likely I'm going to try hard to push for All About You show for next week. And to people out there, until I see you again, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.